trying that.
Do you really want to do you want to take your shoes off?
I was gonna say, I think these boots are clean.
This is
my
good.
bed. Do you want to take my shoes off?
This is
Your
great.
shoes off?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, James.
What? You're a guest in my home.
Well, I didn't want to take them out in front of your face. I mean, I can do.
That's a very different thing right now.
We're talking about her feet.
Yeah.
That could still be a thing, but it's not.
That's what I was going for, but okay.
Oh, goodness.
So it's day 2.
Can you get out of my bed? Can you please get out of my bed?
You want my dirty feet?
I'll tuck you in.
Fine, here. You can just...
Okay, I like
Have them
this.
there, then.
This is good.
Now I feel like Amanda because my arm's gone to some kind of feline creature.
So day 2 is in the books. Carlie's joining us, Alicia, and we got Brendan back.
I haven't been on yet this year.
You haven't yet.
It's only been one before this year.
It's only been one before this year.
I know it feels like it's been an eternity, but it's been 2 days.
Yeah.
Can I please have my arm? You actually couldn't have me. Thank you.
Just tuck yourself in.
I'll
You
have,
won't notice
I'll
it.
have
You
one
can
foot
tuck-
under and 1 foot over.
1 foot under,
Fine,
1 foot over.
I don't
Wait, no,
care,
you
as long as
should
you leave, it's
arm
good.
lock him with the 1 foot and the 1 foot that way.
What if you break my arm? This is my right arm. I do this everything but writing. I need this arm.
You need
Yeah,
that for
you can
everything
get a
except for
leave.
nothing.
Yeah. What?
You can get a leave.
A what?
A leave of absence.
For what?
Medical
Breaking your
leave.
arm.
Yeah.
I don't think they'd let me do
No,
that.
probably not.
No,
But, you know,
they'd be like, you don't need your arm to teach. I'm like, but I gesticulate so much. Like, no, tough. I have to drive home.
that would be
Real
that would be
problem.
more important. That's very. That's
I mean,
fine.
I drive
live
one-handed.
here now.
Oh, great.
Alicia, you gonna
so
drive
good.
him home?
What? No.
So, we did yesterday, but I guess 3 of you were not here.
No.
So if there's anything yesterday that we didn't talk about, then use your psychic powers to work out what those are.
Did you talk about the posterior?
No, we didn't because we were on that talk.
We're on that talk, so we
If
could
you
not talk
wanna
about Dave's talk.
The thing is, I was too close to the large posterior to realize that it was weird.
Very large.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Just
It's
large.
pulling it out of a large posterior.
Yeah. What were they pulling out of it? I don't even remember.
It's a
that.
posterior probability. A posterior
Yeah.
probability is a distribution.
No, but what were they pulling out of it? I can't
The
because it was
number.
like blank was pulled out of a very large posterior.
This number, this value. So they pulled a value. They made a value judgment.
Okay.
So
I thought it had
the-
like a special
A
name.
Probability
or something.
distribution that you get after your analysis is called a posterior probability.
Mm.
But if you're pulling something out of a large posterior, that also means you're pulling
A very large posterior.
very large posterior.
And it was in huge font across the screen, and,
And it-
I expected laughter, and I was the only
And,
one
and,
that.
and, and, and here's the
I was
thing,
like-
I chuckled
I was
because
like-
I am fairly certain that Dave did intend that as a joke.
Are you sure?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
He also complained in that talk about how he needed to not do people told him not to do Pokemon anymore, so he
Oh,
had
yeah.
to do pictures of
Well,
Actual
yeah, and
fossils.
he used a nomocarotid trilobites, and I'm pretty sure he did use the same one every time.
He did.
No, they were slightly different.
No, I think he modified
Slightly
the pictures.
different.
Yeah.
I think he like extended the
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he
Why can't you
added
use
on the
Pokemon
spines.
anymore? It's
Yeah.
relevant.
People told him off for it.
Like, this is...
They're just
unsafe.
jealous of
He,
Twitter.
no. He had like Vaporeon anagenetically evolving from a Vulpix, which is not how Pokemon work.
Oh, wait,
so he
so-
was using Pokemon incorrectly.
Yes, he was using them
That's
as if they
fair.
were actually evolutionary units rather than
Okay.
beings that underwent some kind of spiritual rapture and became a better individual, which is how
Not always
Pokemon work.
better.
Not always. I mean, Pikachu's better than Raichu.
Is he?
Objectively on all the stats, there's no reason
He's
to.
faster.
Yeah, but Raichu's cooler.
No, he's
But
not.
he's not
No,
as
he
cute.
is. He is. No, Raichu's cooler because you can put him in a baseball hat.
You can put Pikachu in a
Yeah,
baseball
No,
Oh,
hat.
yeah.
Pikachu in a baseball hat looks like a delinquent. He was like a little rat in a hat.
That's
Raichu
just,
in a
you know, he
baseball
should be
hat.
But you also
protected.
can't hit him because he's faster.
No, you can hit him. You can hit that Pikachu as much as you want.
Pokemon's or Pikachu's not like a
Did you just
chinchilla.
plural Pokemons?
No, I was trying to
Pokemon.
say Pikachu.
I think it's
If you
supposed
said
to be a squirrel.
Pokemon instead of Pikachu, so if I went human, oh no, I mean Alicia.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Ash
You're
does
like,
just
"Oh."
call him Pikachu. He just calls him Pikachu. It's like,
So that's... Well, that doesn't make any sense for your argument.
yeah,
It doesn't need to make sense. I just need to be loud.
you proved that.
That's not.
Yeah.
That's when you jumped out of the wrong elevator.
No, I jumped into the right one. I went back to the safety.
I went to a talk where they said like you can't just keep saying a wrong thing louder and louder to make it right.
What talk
That's
was
actually
that?
a good talk.
Was that the same one? Probably.
No, I'm just hoping that
Oh.
you could expound upon that one because that seems relevant today.
Oh, I mean, it could have been anything.
Okay.
But yeah, they were like, don't. Yeah. saying something louder and louder does not make it.
Was
right.
it a paleontology talk?
Probably.
No, I mean I bet it wasn't. We probably need that talk.
No, I don't know.
You should have come to the short course.
I wanted to, but I was tired.
I went to a short course.
I had to drive here. 6 hours.
I had to drive here.
Yeah. Wait, you live here.
You drive here every day.
Did you go to the teaching short course?
No.
Can you teach paleo?
Yeah.
Do you want to teach paleo? I'll pay you $50 a week.
No.
You told me you don't want to teach.
No, I'll teach.
Got that on the record.
I like teaching. I do like
You do
teaching.
like teaching.
For the record, the JW Marriott's coffee machine burnt my thumb really badly. I'm totally gonna sue.
I don't think that's going to be quite the same as the McDonald's lawsuit,
No.
because I think that one's on you.
No, it's not on me. It said it was done and it wasn't.
So, yeah, I guess if no one has anything that immediately pops to mind outside of some Pokemons.
I'll
I
see
mean,
if
I
can
like
find
Wagner's
that
talk, but I
now.
assume
I
you
saw-
talked about
I saw
it.
We talked about Pete's, yeah.
So text mining bryozoans. Did you all see that?
I did not see that.
Yeah. They were looking at a way to read a bunch of journal articles and figure out using like positive and negative sentence associations to figure out
Really?
what species were in what time periods in formation.
Okay.
And then they were using the context clues of the sentence through their model to decide, like, is the sentence saying that this species is in this formation or this species is not in this formation or sometimes occurs? So they had to teach the computer how to read.
Cool.
And so they did it a test on humans, so the person presenting and also seemed like some random friend probably in the department read the same sentences and they had 84% similarity.
Okay.
Sometimes they would read the same sentence and one of them would say, this means it's in the formation, and one of them would read the same sentence and say, this means it's not in the formation. But 84% of the time they were the
Okay.
same. The computer had 83%.
Okay.
Cool.
So that was pretty cool, but he was like, that's not very good, 80%, but
I mean,
it
so
was
I,
interesting that they were
you
able
know-
to teach the computer to be as good as the two of them, not being able
Uh-huh.
to decide
I
whether or not that bryozoan
This
was
sounds
in
like
the sentence
Yeah.
going into the formation or
this
not.
sounds like a $1 million grant that KU got to digitize the treatise that I think nothing came of.
yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I think it's an interesting perspective of 80% is not good. I'd seen that there was a
Yeah.
talk today that was looking at extinction predictability.
Yeah, and he was like 77%.
It's like
Not
that's
great.
fine.
It's fine.
And I'm just like, that's an you're talking about an ecological characteristic. You're talking about an ecological interaction. 77% is pretty freaking good.
It's like if
Like,
I
if
got
people
found on a
got a-
calculus test, I'm like, all right.
If people got a 56% that they can predict, like, oh, because you have this foot, you're in this environment, they'd be like, okay, so there's
Yeah.
a signal there. Saying 76% predictivity
Yeah.
is pretty good.
I can't remember who that person was though.
That was, well, he was working with Seth. I think it was one of Seth's
Oh
students.
yeah, no, that one. But I'm thinking about the bryozoan.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that was one I saw. Not the
Yes,
bryozoan
the
thing,
other
but
one,
the
though,
extinction
yeah.
one, where they were looking at different models of predicting extinction, and they used models based upon whether or not you were inferring the history of the organisms versus whether or not you were just taking it a priori assumptions. And history helped a little bit, but for the most part, history didn't seem to matter all that much for understanding whether or not something was going to go extinct
Yeah.
compared to the environment that it was living in presently. Which makes sense if historical components are a random walk distribution. Like, you're going to have history being kind of historical and random, and something like a mass extinction event is going to be a massive ecological selection event, right?
And the fact that everything that I've ever seen at GSA and done says the big five have no selectivity anyway.
Well, also
Or
that.
very little.
But, I mean, yeah, that's true too, so.
Depends on how you define the big five, though. Depending on whether, because that's always.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
Okay, how about the PT, the TJ, and the KPG are pretty much like
The random ones. Yeah.
they just kind of like
KT's actually surprisingly selective compared, I mean, at least in terms of a lot of things that go.
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
But I
And
mean
is-
like marine invertebrates, like
Yeah.
Right.
it's kind of both of them.
Yeah, agreed. The Permian ends up being like the most. It's like the opposite of the hail of bullets. Like, there's so many bullets that it just doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Like,
like there's one of every. It's really like the arc. Like
Yes.
one of everything makes it through, and there's one of everything.
Yeah.
And that's all there is. Not enough to reproduce, just one of everything.
yeah, cool. Oops. So that was interesting, but that was all part of the extinction section, which I spent the whole morning on. And
Okay.
honestly, I think the one that hit me the most, I thought was the most interesting, was Steve's talk. Steve Wang.
Yeah.
I don't know if you.
I did go to that, but I didn't write like anyone's names down. I was
Okay.
delinquent.
So Steve had this this project, and he actually started by detailing what the project was, because he had an undergraduate student that came up with this idea of looking at species range or expected generic range, and how that's associated with survivalship across every single extinction event. So not even just the mass extinctions, but also background extinctions and individual turnover periods. And then compare that to the modern by using sort of the current threat level, because we can't actually say what is going extinct because we're in the process of killing it. Human beings, hooray.
And then quantifying probability based off the 6 threat levels, which is a wibbly-wobbly thing to do.
And there were 5 different ways. He's like, and all of these are unsatisfying, but we did all 5 different ways and got the exact same results. So it doesn't matter.
They're all not great, but they all agree.
They all agree, so it's we're probably onto something.
Yeah.
And so he looked at the range size expectation to whether or not you survive extinction events, and it was the Permian, the Triassic, and was the thing was the Permian. I think it was the Permian, Triassic, and the Cretaceous were all very standard low correlation to age. Your Ordovician ends up being much more like an accelerated background extinction, where longer lived things seem to do pretty better. Say, if you take a look, surviving the extinction event is only part of the study, at least in terms of looking at the Ordovician, but that's personal biases, because lots of things survive but do not persist beyond the Silurian. But then, when you look at what's happening in the modern, the closest equivalent, at least in just the initial plotting of the age, is the Permian. Our extinction event, in terms of the expectations,
I've been saying that all along.
is the Permian mass extinction. At least in terms of the age of taxa that are going extinct, is the least biased towards age. Being older lived doesn't matter. And then he did a cluster analysis of this and showed that it was the modern and the Permian were the closest clustered together, and then the ones immediately afterwards were all of the individual extinctions that led to the Permian.
There was also erroneously low peaks in a random extinction in the Middle Ordovician and one in the Cambrian, but that's probably because they're not actually extinctions. That's things evolving into other things. So, which maybe that's what's happening now.
We don't know.
Yeah.
This is all building off of the stuff we've talked about.
Yeah,
podcasts
it's
ago.
almost as if we're taking all of the ways you can kill something and doing them all at once.
Yeah.
The one thing that I do take heart out of this is that we might not know what an animal's doing, but we do realise if we're killing it. So,
Yeah. Well, like he said, nobody does anything about brachiopods. We have no idea what their
Yeah, that was great.
What their ranking is, but
He was like, we only care about the cute.
assume that we're probably killing them.
We only care about the cute cuddly things.
Yeah.
That's the only thing we actually look at.
it's real fun.
Brachiopods are cute.
It's not that people don't.
They're not
Well, they're
very
harder to
cuddly.
study.
Yeah. It's
Have you
great.
cuddled one?
It's great
Yes.
going through the ICZN
You
red
you
list.
probably can soon if we make a plushy one.
Yes.
No,
Oh, I'm sure
the
there
ones
is one.
that have the sponges that grow on them at Shoals.
Do you know what though? It's really good going through the red list rankings and looking at all the things that don't have sufficient data, which is probably about 65% of life. But if you look at, one thing they do is they list what the animals are used for and their resources. If you look at the one for humans, which are least concerned,
Food is one of them.
food and sport is what humans are used for.
Like, as in football players.
No.
As in.
Dangerous game.
Okay.
That was someone having a lot of fun when they wrote that.
So you're
I'm
finding by
very
apps.
concerned about exactly how much fun.
I was gonna see if there were.
Are you trying to find? So I mean,
Pitch it to the PRI.
Tigarachalida.
We want a
So I'm
Strophomenid.
saying I will. No, give us your suggestions. Paleozoic
yeah,
pets.
Raffensquino would be cute.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm gonna need that in an email.
yeah, no
I'm
problem.
not gonna retain that after I leave the store.
Clustidia is cute. I don't even know if that's how it's pronounced, but
Or you could get one
Actually-
of the ones with spikes.
Yeah, go with a canidid.
Yeah.
Productive would be too spiky because it's all over, but the
They
canidids just
do
have
need
these
to be able to
attaching spikes that go on the edge,
construct
so
it.
that you can crawl. They can attach to something.
Okay.
And if it's kind of bendable foam, you could actually make it something so you could just put it on a.
Underrepresented good groups. I mean, something like a chylostome bryozoan.
We could make anything happen.
I
Do you
think
just
a
want the
chylostome
zooid?
bryozoan.
Just the
I'm
single
thinking like,
zooid.
yeah.
I was
The
thinking it
zooids
should
are
be a
But
finger
it's
puppet.
life sized.
It should be a finger puppet. It should be blown up, and you should be able to.
Actually, yeah, a
You should be able
bryozoan
to
where you
put the
can put all
bryozoan
5
out.
hands in the finger puppet and just kind of
Oh.
move the zoo.
Yeah.
Okay, if they've done a 5 foot reactor,
I would say
where's the life size orthocone?
you have to send all these.
Well, we
emails
just
to
did. We
Gabrielle.
just did a cephalopods. So they did the ammonite
What
recently.
about a Denisovian
Actually,
man?
I did talk to.
They
John
have to be
Hendricks about
Paleozoic.
Oh,
something straight shelled.
yeah.
That's like.
Well, I mean, if you unstitch the
Brontosaurus.
ammonite, you could stretch it out, and it would actually become a straight-shelled orthocone.
Yes, or we could just make another Kickstarter.
It would look weird though if you just unstitched it and then rolled it, because it would be like.
Sorry. You can buy modern brachiopods on Etsy.
Oh,
Of course, you can. Etsy is a hive of disrepute.
And I didn't know there were red ones.
Oh no, they're really brightly coloured.
Yeah.
No, they're amazingly
Are
pretty.
they from the Pacific or somewhere else?
No, Scotland. You
I
get.
didn't know there were brachiopods in Scotland.
Oh yes, I have a video I can show you from the 1970s.
So, Brendan, do you have a talk you want to talk about?
This is important.
Or
Brachiopods are really
expanded
pretty,
brachiopods.
and don't believe the fossil record.
Wait,
During which they're.
what? Wait,
Right.
James.
Or
I
pyrite.
was
Yeah.
going to say, James, did you want to back that up a little bit and clarify what you
About
meant by don't
colour.
believe the fossil record?
Don't believe the fossil record, it lies to you. Brachiopods never existed until the Eocene. He's a fraud.
The only true group are arthropods.
Yeah, the arthropod is the Earth-human. We evolved from arthropods sometime in the late Paleozoic.
So we are
Then we created
we're
the
ostensibly
brachiopods.
an educational podcast. So Brendan, what did you see?
I woke up to go over to see Ethan Grossman give his talk about the history of the world.
The entire history of the world?
The Phanerozoic history of
Oh,
the
I
world.
wish I'd seen that.
I'd like to know that.
Doing isotopes in conodon apatite coupled with isotopes in very, very carefully screened samples of calcite from brachiopods, where they looked at unaltered sections of shell.
So
That
do the brachiopods take over when the conodons die?
No. They were looking to do to try to get at what the history, especially in the Devonian and Carboniferous, of.
That's not the Phanerozoic.
No, they did more than that.
Oh,
but
okay. I was going to say
especially
conodons
in-
die in the Triassic, so is it like, oh, the world ended then?
No, the world did. No. Trying to explain what he did.
Okay.
He was looking at the records of conodonts and brachiopods together to get a sense of what is controlling trends in the O18 values that you get from calcite through time. Conodonts being something that's more difficult to alter than calcite with respect to isotopes. So doing them co-occurring, they were testing whether there was global secular change in what the seawater value of O18 was. So whether the seawater value did shift through time, or if it was just much warmer in the Paleozoic, like ridiculously warm, like some results go up to like 80 degrees.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that's cool. I've got a bad joke that I want to say, and I'm sorry in advance. But do the secular trends agree with papal records?
I knew you were going there. It was like in slow motion, and I just couldn't stop it.
Yes, they do, but they're in the secret archives, so
Okay.
might as well allowed to see.
Okay, that's
Hidden
interesting.
behind the Mona Lisa.
It was just used the word secular. That's what set me off. Sorry.
Secular meaning in sequence through time.
Isn't that sequitur?
No, a
Is that a
sequitur
non-sequitur?
is something that follows.
It's,
So
A
it sounds like they have
sequitur
very
is something
similar
that
roots
follows.
okay.
That's the root. The tor root means a person who does whatever the verb is,
Oh, okay.
and then the feminine is tricks.
Executor.
I always thought the name of the superstar destroyer was Executor, but apparently it is Executor because it would be
Yes.
Executioner.
Speaking of which, we missed a planetary geology section called Friends of Hoth, episode 3.
Oh, I
I saw it,
that.
and also
you
that's
did?
I didn't go to it, but I saw
I
that in the
saw it
app and was
also.
like, I wish I had time for these sorts of things.
yes, I saw it. I walked past it.
I did go and see the Europa Lander poster.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Did it land?
Well, you know how funding works in planetary sciences. It's on, it's off, it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. It's currently on. So
Uh-huh.
Space
There.
Force.
Are we,
Yeah,
are
they're
we
moving.
sure that Europa has a surface to land on?
I'm gonna
Yeah.
switch to geobiology so I can go to Mars.
Okay. You
Do
actually
you
want to
wanna
go to
die
Mars?
On Mars?
Yeah.
You know the first people to go on Mars are the first people to die on
So
Mars.
there's two ways I'm gonna die: either getting hit by a car
Or Mars.
going to Mars.
Okay.
Although you,
No,
Or I'll
but you
live
said
forever.
you'd live to
Or-
100. If
Or
you go to
yeah.
Mars,
so that's the
there's
thing.
fewer cars.
I'm like inserting another probability in here.
Okay,
which is
so
the probability of
although we
becoming
could
an
then
astronaut
start
Hit by a
and dying.
car, die in space, or live forever.
Yeah.
although if you really
Well,
want to go to
as
Mars
long
and then you
as
inevitably
biologically
die on
possible.
Mars,
Which again, live forever.
we can
clearly.
start stacking up the number of people that died on Mars from embolic asphyxiation, see if the trends are the same as on Earth, and compare it to shark deaths on both
We should
planets.
see how many people die of sharks in Mars.
And that's how we'll know we're a new species.
It'd be really great to see the shark with a little space helmet on. Well, there's no liquid water, but somehow they're managing it.
I mean,
just
there used to
fine.
be, and so they're now very dry
Land
sharks.
sharks.
Land sharks.
Yes,
Graboids.
yes.
So later on, the answer,
Another joke no one will get.
the answer in the chalk was that
Yeah.
diagenesis, not as bad of a problem, but maybe there is some
Maybe there's some?
trend.
Okay.
But if you are correcting for what you know about the samples and you're getting the very best, most pristine shells from brachiopods and you've carefully screened them, you get realistic temperature estimates, but also that the global record is different from the record that you get if you parse it out by how restricted each basin is.
Okay.
So like if you're looking at different times and you have, interior seaway is going to look different than Europe, than China, depending on continental position and everything. So
Okay.
it was a beautiful global curve with the plea to care about your actual local
But so
information.
at the same time, repeated local environments that should theoretically be the same are different because of context.
That only if you say should be the same based on what stage you're in.
Oh, okay.
So yeah,
Like-
there's a temporal global average, but then localized you'll have variations along that
Yeah.
average.
And in ways that make sense. So like there was
Like
a
how we have
split.
global warming, but it was very, very cold in Boston last year.
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You take a look at temperature charts, and like a few areas are very cold
I
and the rest
heard-
is warming.
I heard from somebody else about a talk related to that I did not attend.
Okay.
That explains that. Yeah.
Hmm.
We can get into that later.
Okay.
This is not about paleontology.
Fair.
I mean,
But
if it's relevant, it can. You
I
can
mean, it's
talk
going to
about
cause
it.
extinction. It's going to be relevant to paleontology at
Yeah,
some
it's
point.
gonna kill us all.
Yeah.
If
No, it's
it's
going to be
so-
us and the rats and the cockroaches and the pigeons.
Are we gonna make it?
Probably. We'll eat the
Mhm.
rats and then each other. But
I mean, sport.
I had a
I'm pretty good at them.
no. I gave a not a colloquium talk, a convocation talk.
We're larger than the KPG cutoff, so I just feel like.
Yeah, no,
Gamesley.
I was sort of saying it's like, well, the apex things tend to go first,
Yeah.
and then somebody said, well, I mean, we're pretty adaptable. I'm like, okay, well, we might survive, but
It requires
then
so much nutrients.
yeah,
No,
but
but
then
if
like
the
you eat the
apex
rats and
thing
each
goes
other, and
first,
also
then
then there's
everything
a
else will be
philosophical thing
fine.
about the Earth, which is like, even if we survive, like, do we deserve to if we've killed everything else
Yeah.
on it? So
So I guess I was saying, Carlie, did you start us off? I can't remember.
No, I don't remember.
Okay.
Atmospheric heat waves.
Atmospheric heat waves. That's what you
There
want to talk about
are
next.
atmospheric heat waves that essentially trap the jet stream.
Yeah.
And that's why
Yeah.
things like Boston will stay cold forever because the
Yeah.
jet stream is just bypassing you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just dumping precipitation and desiccating other areas.
You end up with
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
bizarre instances of polar vortices
Yeah.
that end up.
yeah, that's why England gets it in the butt because of the
Well, because you have the jet stream.
yes,
Like when the
but
jet stream
it's
gets
shifting,
trapped
but
someplace
it's
else, it'll
scooting
get.
up into it's wobbling.
Ah,
It's like
yeah.
wobbling a lot, and so
Yeah.
all the basking sharks go to Scotland. So Cornwall's lost like the cool thing about it.
Well, I think about all the shark attacks in Cape Cod now.
Mm.
That's becoming a new hotbed for great whites.
Well, I mean, great whites had a nursery actually in Long Island Sound.
Yeah.
I just never realised.
I do know that because I went to Montauk every year as a child, and we would watch Jaws and then swim in Montauk, which is where it's based off of. They say it's Cape Cod, but it's really Montauk.
Huh.
That's That's where they caught
the
the largest great white.
And the best thing about that is that water is so murky.
So dark.
Fun,
dark.
random.
I don't know
factoid.
how my parents were like, yeah, let's take our two precious children into the ocean here.
And yet you live.
I can't believe it.
Fun random factoid: the show Murder She Wrote.
Uh-huh.
They filmed that actually in the Universal Studios lot for the Jaws ride.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yes.
I'm
I've been
interested.
watching that because it's on TV at like midnight to 2 a.m.
They would need to shut
You
down
should try
the
sleeping.
animatronic.
How's your life going, Brent?
Sleeping might help
Sometimes
the
I
things you
come
do in
home
the
from work
daytime.
at midnight and then I
Go
read
to bed.
papers until 2.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, read papers and watch Murder She Wrote.
You
Yeah.
read papers. You're at the stage of your career where you don't do that anymore.
Just the abstract and the
Yeah, just the
conclusions
abstract. Maybe
and
see
any
a
relevant
picture.
figures.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that this was
That's not
my
what any of our
mistake.
reviewers like.
And as the one person who actually tries to do the damn work on this podcast, I'm oftentimes carrying the weight.
That's not true. Sometimes.
So I'm a good substitute then.
No, what you got to understand is Curtis reads the papers.
Chase replacement.
And-
That's what this is all about. You're actually auditioning right now to just basically all about Eve this shit. You're like, James, I'm your biggest fan. I'm like, James, fucking run.
Well, I mean, the trouble is it would be an upgrade, so I'm not sure. Like, in terms of the podcast, it's probably a good thing. And in terms of me having more time for doing nothing and playing computer games, it's also probably a good
Do
thing.
you know how All About Eve ends? It
I have
doesn't
no
end
idea
well
what
for-
that is.
Okay.
So, okay.
That's not my intention. I don't want to get myself voted off the island. I want to come back for year 3.
Of course.
Yeah.
If there's a year 3.
He's going. He won't make it. So
You're not going to Phoenix?
I don't know. Maybe we'll see.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try.
We can do the special edition NAPC one.
do I need to go to an
At the
APC?
pool
Where
party.
is an APC again?
Riverside.
Oh God, it's
Riverside.
down California.
There's a pool party.
3-hour time difference.
It's easy for her.
Hello!
Yeah, she's there.
Last time I was in California, I drank a bottle of wine in a hot tub, and I got like bad burns on my foot from the vent, and almost
That-
died from dehydration.
That probably will all happen again. Because
Yeah.
every time Mary Tozer talks about it, another party is added to the itinerary. She's like, at the Paleo Society dinner was like, and now there's also going to be a dance party, and Phoebe Cohen's already making the playlist.
I want to go to the dance party.
It's going to be great.
There can't be more than like
It's
6
gonna be-
people in the hot tub or 8 because I can't deal with that.
It's going to be very California.
But we can record this in a hot tub.
So Alicia, what talks did you see?
So,
I did go to 2 paleo-related talks.
Awesome. What'd you
Yeah.
say?
Yeah.
You just
Just out.
destroyed your diary.
It's not a diary, and I did destroy it. Look, it goes right back in.
Katie has those.
Yeah, these are awesome. So
Are
one
they
of
for clumsy people that destroy their diary?
no, they're for
No.
people who want flexibility. Like,
You
say I
can
want to put
rearrange
this
the
page back
pages.
here, or like say I want to put May, June,
You mean
and July back
indecisive
here.
people
I
that
can.
can't decide what order to write things in?
Can you just let Alicia talk about what paper?
Yes,
what
how
she
Yeah.
Okay, so
I don't have that much space on my freaking phone.
We can start with mine. Switch it over.
so one of the talks I went to talked about the archaeocyathids.
Oh, okay. Do you know what they are?
Now you care. Yes, they are an early sponge.
Second.
They're an early sponge, first reef builders, and they're found on every continent. They ended at the Cambrian. However, so these ones were in the Illinois basin. They were found in the McCoy #1 well,
Okay.
which I guess is on the edge of the proto-Illinois basin, at like 2,300 feet. So below the mount, I think it was partially in the Mount Simon, partially in the Argenta formations. Anyway, so they discovered these silicified fossils. They were a few millimeters in size. They were broken cup shapes, and so they didn't know what these were. So they passed it along to a bunch of paleontologists, I guess. And eventually, someone was like, "I think that might be an archaeocyatid." So they talked to DeBren. I don't know if that means anything to you. Okay. Anyway, so
I don't know. I don't know.
It's
It's not.
archaeocyatid.
It's not a bad pseudonym.
no. So I guess DeBren does archaeocyatids. So
Clearly
they
we do not.
confirmed that they were archaeocyatids. But I guess these are the first archaeocyatids from the mid-continent
It's
of
gonna
the
be one of
U.S.
those things we're gonna get a tweet on.
So, yes, they confirmed that they are archaeocyathids and probably from the Toyonian or the Bodoman times?
They've been naming a bunch of new
I
Cambrian
was like,
stages.
please
Oh
don't
yeah,
Okay.
right.
Stage
So many-
3 is now a thing.
Yeah, they
It's got a name now.
they used to number them for a while. And now
Yeah.
they're giving them names.
Okay.
They
Well, like
couldn't decide on
510 million
type
years
sections.
ago.
Okay.
Yeah,
But yeah, so they're going to do thin sections, I guess, to determine the actual taxonomy. And they're the
it's all form taxa anyway.
Mm.
It is. It's based the the taxonomy is based off the perforations between the dividing walls, and that's probably based more off ecology than it is actual relationships. I just talked about reefs.
In any case, these are the oldest fossils from the Illinois Basin, and they probably therefore represent the SOC 1 supersequence.
Cool.
Yeah.
I thought you said sock for a minute.
Yeah, the sock sequence.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is how you would say that. But.
Yeah.
I'd say sock, but I'm English and I'm wrong.
The other talk I went to was not so, it wasn't so much about the paleontology itself, it was about, this was by an IU professor. He was discussing how bear's ears and the Grand Staircase Escalante had been cut back.
Oh, that
and
one.
what that
We
represented.
considered doing that.
Like he showed the maps and showed, like which time
that David
periods
Pauly's
were now
talk?
cut. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And so and he talked about the types of fossils there and kind of a little bit about the history of the national monuments and what it meant to be a national monument and like what kind of protections that had. And he talked about how science is a process, so you need to revisit these things, so you can't just be like, you study it once and go away. Anyway,
It's a
so
byline for the podcast.
I guess he said SVP was preparing things as some kind of.
They were doing a
Proposed.
legal. They're doing a legal challenge.
Yeah.
In any case, I guess currently, because they haven't put in a new management plan, it is still being managed as they were prior. There was a question, and I thought that was interesting. Someone asked about, since the protections have been taken away, if anyone had actually put in permits for like mineral exploration. And I guess there's like a few mining permits, but not a whole lot. So, I guess to be fair in some sense, maybe that land's not going to be destroyed, but obviously having the protections and accessibility is important.
I mean,
It's
wait until what's economic changes.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a
That's
situation
true.
where they're just weakening things to open up the abuse.
Yeah, and that was mentioned too. Is like
Yeah.
any
And to set
weakening is
precedent
not.
to take away other national.
Yes, and
Yeah.
that was also.
And eventually
the
no
plan.
public land.
Yeah, so those are the
Yeah.
two paleo-related talks I went to today.
I mean, that's maybe a bit of an escalation, but that's kind of a goal that some
I
people
believe
would have.
anything can happen now.
Yeah.
I was so naive.
I was thinking that this would be about as bad as it would be. I was not necessarily seeing the Nazis as much. I mean, I knew they were there, but as much was.
Yeah, you didn't expect them to think that it was okay now.
And no, I did know. I definitely did think that. I didn't think that it would just be
Such a
as
large
big.
proportion.
Yeah.
Yeah, proportionally so large.
I mean, yeah.
So
We
Curt,
suspect
what
it.
did you see?
Yeah, we suspected, but I did. I
From
had
the
to be-
outside looking in, like America's pretty bad.
So James.
Yeah, England's pretty bad too.
No, that was not what I was going for. You have a talk.
Oh,
Tell us how your
Science
country
and
sucks.
justice.
Let's stop talking about the degradation of the
my
human
country
race.
is the byline for my country now is after Brexit happens, there will be adequate food.
That's actually pretty good, and I appreciate the words "adequate" there.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
a lot coming from a country not known for its cuisine.
They're somewhat known for their cows.
We understand the food pyramid. There's starch and then there's meat.
I agree with
And
this.
tea.
Well,
Yeah.
you have to divide the
Have you
meat
ever had
though between
you ever
boiled and
had a
fried.
chip sandwich where you get your big
That's
like French fries
horrifying.
and put it in bread with butter? It's amazing.
No.
That kind of sounds like what I ate when I went to Hungary.
I thought.
I mean, we're a very Germanic society.
Yeah.
We have a lot of.
There was like
Yeah.
butter on all of the ham and cheese sandwiches.
There's a good like
Never
kind of
Butter goes on every sandwich
Yeah.
because mayonnaise is not a food item.
That's
proper
that
salad.
does explain it.
the proper
Yeah.
Central and Northern European dishes are just boiled meats and starches.
Yeah. Or salted if they need to last the winter.
Or salted, yeah.
I
Yeah.
encountered a recipe recently in The Joy of Cooking that required a salted meat, and I was like, where does one acquire salted
It's
meat
bacon.
anymore?
Spam.
Yeah,
I was
bacon.
like, what?
You can salt your own meat. I mean, it's jerky.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Biltong.
I'm
Use a biltong.
vegetarian anyway, I wasn't going to make this recipe.
That's fine.
It wasn't gonna, I was
So
so
James,
I
we're
mean,
talking-
What happens
it's
if you salt
dried
the
kale.
tofu?
I
Dried
do.
kale is a substitute.
No, when you want to
No
massage
seaweed.
dressing into your kale, you do put salt on it to break it up so it gets
Or
softer.
or
before
just
you dress
natural
it.
seaweed. I mean, that
Yeah.
would work too.
That's absolutely.
I have three
Did you
talks.
say
that-
natural seaweed?
No, I'm saying it would be naturally salty because it's.
Oh, I thought you were implying.
What are your three
unnatural
salts?
salts.
So
I think
they-
you grow seaweed in tanks now to sell it to
Oh,
people, but
that makes
anyway.
sense. That's right.
The three options are there's two echinoderm talks and there's one talk on algae.
Oh, okay.
I
I
like
saw none of
echinoderms.
those.
I know. I was actually trying to diversify for the podcast.
I did too. I was sitting in a room that no one else was in.
Yeah, so I sat in a room that you weren't in.
There you go.
So
Not even the presenter. No one was there. Not a soul.
Yeah,
Holy
can you
shit.
imagine?
I was sitting in a room all
Can you
alone with
imagine
myself.
But also, like, where did you find that room? Because that's kind of amazing.
And after I
talk there.
after I huffed the substance, I saw the talks all
I
in front
actually
of me.
did find one of the main ballrooms with an empty stage.
Wow.
I can
So,
see that.
yeah.
The Yu-Gi-Oh tournament was over.
The whole place is way too
Yeah.
big. It's
Yeah.
like 5
It's a
times
really
too
big
large
convention center.
for the GSA that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at least we're on like a corner kind of.
So, why don't we talk about one of the
Yeah.
kind of
Algae
Yeah.
Echinoderms.
I like it.
So,
Echinoderms.
because the two Echinoderms talks probably a bit more interesting. So I saw Imran Rahman's talk on 3 Echinoderms from the Herefordshire Lagerstadt, which we've talked about quite a bit before. They're these interesting void fills in this these ash nodules where the ash has come in and completely dissolved away the fossil, so they're just these voids. And they can't CT scan them, and so what they're doing is they're doing this serial sectioning and then scanning the sections so they can rebuild these 3D models. And the interesting thing about this is that at least one of the taxa is widespread and known from elsewhere. So it's not like the usual for Herefordshire stuff where it's like we have no idea what this is and it's completely different from everything else. And so they had an ophiuroid. No, it's not an ophiuroid. Everyone thought that this thing, the Delacoma, was an ophiuroid. It's known from Lake Twadine and the Herefordshire. Not the Herefordshire, that's where we are. And the Hunsrück.
Okay.
And so it's known from the Silurian through to the Devonian. And it was thought to be an ophiuroid, but it's actually an asteroid, so it's a true starfish. And they've got a complete specimen with tube feet.
Whoa.
So they've got the tube feet
That's
preserved.
pretty cool.
And that's really cool. So they've got parts of the water vascular system, so there's soft parts and internal anatomy preserved. Then there's what's called a
A bunch of letters came together.
It's an Idioasteroid.
Okay, that's good.
Edroasteroid?
Idrioasteroid.
Asteroid.
No, they're weird though. They're weird and they're widespread, and it's called Heropergus. And it, basically, my note here is it looks like a conifer bud. And so, if you know what a conifer bud looks like, where it's got the little scales, and then there's the like bulb at
Yeah.
the top, but the bulb is the mouth. And so it's got actually this peduncle, and it sits on the floor, and it's just a stalk with the plates coming off of it and a mouth. Thank you. That was not disturbing.
No problem.
What time period is this from?
Silurian,
Okay.
the best time period.
I like the Mississippi.
Silurian's short and sweet.
Not so sweet. That's anoxia.
That's why I like it. It's all about the asphyxiation.
Okay. Now we're understanding why we talked about
I was
sharks.
gonna say.
And the main thing about this is that there are some exquisite details of its oral area.
Exquisite details of the oral area. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
And most of the echinoderms have plates over the oral area, and this one doesn't, so it's just open to the world. But they have, again, tube feet preserved inside the mouth bit.
Okay.
And the tube feet have 2 configurations, and this is the first time this has ever been observed in echinoderms.
She's targeting her feet just in case.
And so there are 2 sets of tube feet in 2 different configurations inside the mouth, and so the tube feet are inside the mouth, and the food comes in, and they go, and they push it down into the thing, and then it gets dissolved and digested.
Do the tube feet inside the mouth look different than the tube feet outside of the mouth?
They don't have the tube feet are not outside the mouth, and these animals are only inside.
They're only inside the mouth.
Oh.
So it's a bit reversed completely, and so, the
So
tube feet are,
you might not realize it, but it's got feet.
yeah,
That's really weird.
yeah. But the fact that there's these 2 configurations has never been observed anywhere else in echinoderms ever. And so that was kind of cool. And again, we've never seen this sort of level of detail on the water vascular system of extinct echinoderms. And this actually makes idioasteroids even more unique than we thought they did. And then there's this other thing they've got, and this one was an Ophiocystoid. And these are relative of, I've written almonds here, but I think that says echinoids, holothurians. And these, the Ophiocystoids are cool because they're these things which have like murderer's arms that come off of them. They're like long things because the tube feet are huge. They're like jacked tube feet covered in armored plates.
So it didn't skip arm day.
No. And so they've got these
This
long...
feels like the Burgess Shale. This feels like echinoderms freaking out and doing weird stuff and just being like, that didn't work.
I mean, honestly, we have anomalocarids until the Devonian, so like
Yeah.
a lot of weird
Yeah.
stuff persisted.
Really?
We just don't actually. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
small,
Yeah.
but we have them.
Hunsrück Slate has a bunch of stuff that should have died in the Cambrian.
Yeah.
Where is that?
Germany,
Oh.
the place where there's a lot of stuff that should have died a long time ago.
But do they know because of preservation or refugia?
That's the
That's the
debate.
question as to whether or not it's because honestly you leave the Cambrian, you lose that taphonomic window.
Yeah, and like Rob Gaines and other people have shown that there is this chemical shift in the sea chemistry at the time, so we're not sure.
Yeah, so it's possible that a lot of the stuff that is weird Cambrian stuff might have just been components of early Paleozoic ecosystems for a while.
Yeah, and then we find things like Weinbergina, which we think, oh, that's a Devonian horseshoe crab, but actually probably it's an offshoot of something from the early Ordovician.
Yeah.
But yeah, these things have got long-plated tube feet. They have got like strangler's arms, and there's many, and so these things, like starfish and echinoids have like pentagonal symmetry. These are these things which they look like they've got 20 arms. That's because they've got the arm and then all the tube feet, which are the size of the arms, which have got heavy armor plates on them. And it's also got really complex jaw apparatus preserved. These things are known from the Ordovician all the way through to the Triassic, but they're pretty much disarticulated most of the time. This one hasn't been described yet. And it's got this internal ring of jaw apparatus, and it might be the ring canal of the internal water vascular system, but which has never been previously known from any fossil echinoderm. And so they don't have the outer regions of it, so they don't know how it connects up. But basically, these three things are showing aspects of the water vascular system which is not known anywhere else in the fossil record.
Okay.
And so they're able to maybe show this unique window into how the water vascular system evolved in echinoderms, and because these are from three very disparately related echinoderms, they're starting to piece together an idea of how basically in the Paleozoic what the situation was and how similar these more ancestral conditions were between the different groups. So that was kind of
That's
fun.
cool.
And then basically he sort of said, and so the Herefordshire is the way to work out what's going on with the water vascular system. And he corrected himself and it's like, well, it might be one of the best ways. So
there's also modern echinoderms. Whatever.
Yeah. But they're comparing to that, and basically the thing that's going to be interesting is, are some of the similarities we're seeing between these different groups convergence, or are they all inherited from an ancestral condition?
So I saw a talk that's a continuation of a podcast paper favorite.
Sucky whales?
No, this was
cats?
man-eating lions. The same research group did a follow-up to the man-eating lions paper, which, for review, if nobody's familiar with this, but this is this group did a look at the famous man-eaters and noted that they all had injuries that led to them not being able to eat hard foods. And so they suggested they went to human beings because we're soft, even though we're not necessarily all that tasty, and we're pretty easy to kill. So you don't have too much of a risk. And so most of the man-eaters didn't necessarily move to human beings as an alternative food source. So they went and saw smilodons, and looked for smilodons in the fossil record, your good old saber-toothed cats, and they found some in the La Brea tar pits that have injuries. And so they used dental wear patterns, which they spent a lot of time in the beginning talking about how dental wear patterns are actually very specific, very diagnostic on the thing that you are eating. If you're eating something that's rough or tough, it's going to have very similar wear patterns.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the things that they saw was that the things that had these major injuries, they did show signs of eating softer material, but they only excluded truly hard bites, like bone crunches or things like that, which were seen in other smilodons. They still had tougher bits, so it was not like they were necessarily eating different things, but they interpreted that they maybe were not being involved so much in the kill process, which led them to the idea that it's possible smilodons then are social and are sharing for the injured are actually having their meals shared among the group.
Well, this is interesting. They said this about some of the injured lions because and some of the because like there'd be like one that was injured that was like turning good ones to like bad ideas.
Well, that was the idea. Is like there were a few injured, and one just was like a lone wolf that took the rest of the ones off, and so they weren't being able to share with the rest of the group. But so in this case, they're potentially suggesting that's social. And then they had at the very end a picture of a Homo erectus skull that had no teeth whatsoever, and actually had completely fused the joints or the little holes in the jaw where you would actually have the teeth. Because if you knock out all your teeth, eventually over time those holes, the bones will start filling in.
Oh, wow.
And so the idea is that you have to live long enough without teeth in order for that to happen. And so it's a clear example of social structures that are actually allowing for that particular individual to survive.
That Homo erectus switched to eating human meat in order to.
They probably weren't soft back then.
No. Was there ever
Human beings were tougher back then.
Was there just a Smilodon skull with like human hair between the teeth?
No,
So
no.
that's my confusion about the La Brea tar pits is everything is dissociated, so it had to be skull injuries?
It was skull material, and so yeah, you had.
So it's a skull injury.
I mean,
and also
they showed
teeth there.
some of the pictures that were so you have a skull with teeth is still in the sockets.
Yeah.
I
That
mean,
makes
I
sense.
imagine
you
that.
couldn't find a Smilodon and know that its arm had been broken.
No.
I mean, with
These
the
are.
lions, it was like there's an
It's a toothache
abscess or a
issue.
tooth issue.
Yeah, it's a tooth
more
issue.
than anything else.
It's very specifically there, and in this case,
So
they had
they're injured in fact.
they had one of their lions, the modern lions, actually by the time it died still had to have had the jaw pussing. Like it was still in the process of heavy injury. And so these things you could see, like they were showing Smilodons with like, okay, well this is a serious tooth compaction. This is just a hairline split in the jaw.
Yeah.
Like these are all these, like they can't snap at anything anymore. And any fight's gonna really
Were any
hurt
of them like the saber tooth actually cracked or something like that? Because that always seemed like the most plausible regular injury.
I didn't see. I didn't necessarily pick that up on there. It was more again just kind of injuries to the jaw itself.
The thing that really interests me is that Smilodon was actually doing like hard crushing of bone, given the jaw mechanics of having these enlarged teeth in the first place. Like getting the food in, unless they can. I mean, I think they do have a large swing to the jaw, but like most of it's going to be like shearing through the carnassials at the side and biting into.
I don't know, but
But
yeah, that was really cool, and
That's
it was
cool.
a follow up to a favorite paper topic. So
yeah,
Does everyone know what La Brea means?
red.
It means the tar.
Tar.
the tartar,
Yeah.
the tartar
Just
pits.
FYI.
They should actually called it La Brea tar pits. That would be. the tar pits.
You'd have to have
Tartar
the
pits.
Spanish words for pits.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
you're right.
tartar first of all is
Is what the Smilodons were eating. I broke James. I broke James.
I'm trying to work out whether a Tartar is what ethnicity Tartars were, but it was I hope it's not a
Sauce.
pejorative. Yeah, it is a fish sauce, but I hope it's not a pejorative term. But it was definitely an English term for like Russian steppe nomads.
It was
There
No,
are
it's
Northern
a,
Asia.
I think it's an
Steak tartare.
unoffensive.
Okay, cool. I never know with English things. It's
Steak tartare. Like you eat
Raw.
something raw.
yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, just continue down the road. Brendan, do you have anything immediately? What are you thinking of?
There was talk about whelks in Georgia versus whelks in the Long Island Sound, and same species. And
Like
when
snail
they,
whelks?
Yeah, whelks.
As opposed to what?
Yeah, I actually.
I don't know what paleo
Yeah,
is.
Mary. And she was doing isotopes to study when they were growing, and whelks are interesting because they can't eat and grow at the same time, because they use their shell to break the shells of their prey.
Oh,
and
you
it
were
takes them a
mentioning
while
this.
to harden
Okay.
up their shell. So if they grow in rapid increments and then stop and then harden up that shell and then they can eat.
Oh, okay.
So they can't do both at the same time. And so the growing season when they're laying down most of their shell was actually opposite of what you'd think with the latitude. They were doing it in warmer water. The growth occurred
Okay.
in warmer water in the north
Yeah.
because it gets hot and they just like shut down and don't do anything
Except
in
grow.
the south.
Is it a metabolism?
No, they don't.
Oh, in the
grow.
south,
In the
sorry.
south, they get to a point where they don't. So they grow faster in the south, but during two briefer intervals during the
Okay.
spring and fall.
Oh, okay.
So
And
they
so
still get to an overall larger size in the south then?
they get to a very similar size.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of interesting because there's, over around Raleigh we've got cherry blossoms that bloom in the fall because you get to those warmer temperatures and fall becomes spring for a lot of.
Do they bloom twice a year then, or just once?
I think these ones just bloom fall.
Oh,
Yeah.
weird.
But I thought that was cool because I didn't know that they could grow and eat at the same time.
Yeah. That makes sense now. Having known about whelks a long time.
Yeah.
But
So I
I
guess they
never
get like a
thought about
spike
it.
each growing season.
Oh no, it's not. They do the lip. They like shove it into a clam
No, but like,
and then like
how many times a year do they take a growth
Because the whelk has
hiatus
kind of like those like
they take
angular
a
sides,
summer
right?
hiatus and a winter hiatus,
to
and
grow.
yeah, and in the north
Or like
they
the
grow mostly in the summer and eat
They're
mostly
like,
in the
they're like
winter.
the ones you'd hold up to your ear.
Yeah, like the really big, like conch shell looking thing,
But not a
but not a conch.
I think I'm thinking of lightning whelks. I don't know if
That's a
all.
whelk.
Yeah.
Whelks can be
Well,
pretty
the-
small.
Is the one that she
But there's
studies.
some that look
Yeah, whelks
more.
can be small.
Yeah.
Whelks can be big.
She studies Busacan though.
You can eat
Yeah,
whelks
like-
in London.
That's
like
a
this
decent
one,
whelk.
like is each of those thing? Oops.
Now, each of those things is probably a year.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
So you want to like hold this up to the camera?
Well, how long do
No.
they live?
Oh no, snails that
You-
aren't fertile
This is
live a
great.
while. They
You
can,
can
gonna be
eat
so
whelks
good.
in London.
they can live like 10,
Yep,
15
this
years.
is this is gonna go really well on audio.
Whelks, I
Yeah.
think. Yay.
That's not the worst thing we've made people go through audio.
Yeah, that's fair. That's
We need
true.
lots of context clues for looking things up.
Yeah. Google.
I
whelk.
still want to know what a
Google
whelk is
yeah.
that's not a snail.
Yeah, I wasn't assuming.
Not
it was
Lawrence.
ones. I just know the
No.
lightning whelks.
Sweet.
Is it Carlie?
I saw a bunch of talks from friends, so I'll wait for someone else to bring those up.
Okay. I mean, we might not have seen them.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. And
I've
I
seen
saw
before.
Simon Derek's talk about estimating
Saw that one, yeah.
range
I saw
size
that.
things. My takeaway from that was he was like, "There's a really cool new model.
It doesn't work.
It sucks."
Yeah.
And it looked very interesting. I was like, oh, that looks like it's really actually approximating their range size. So starting at the beginning, he's trying to approximate range size and see whether or not if the fossil record is a good approximation of range size. Like,
Yeah.
could
Well-
you find all the different outcrops a fossil appears in, and then comparing it to the modern, could you find all the different possible environments an animal today appears in, and would that actually replicate their range?
And also, what are the types of limiting methods you're
Yeah.
going to get an area?
Yeah.
Do you use the least area polygon? Do you
Yes.
try and do these cube system or square systems where you
Yeah.
essentially look at these in 5 degree or 5 minute
Yeah.
latitudinal
5 degree by
grids?
5 degree grid.
It's 5 degree by
But
5
that
degree
came
grid.
in
yeah.
later after he rejected the
Yes.
the alpha convex.
Well,
hull.
so he had the alpha convex
con-
hull, which is the one that's going to be a least area polygon, but
Yeah.
it's a least area polygon that tries to be as form fitting as possible. Which here's the thing.
Yeah.
That's already been discussed by biogeographers in the past. That when you try to actually approximate it too closely, you're actually going to cause more error than you
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
But also, as you start dropping off sites, you're not just losing like the line in between. It's now invaginating and
Yes.
taking away a
Yes.
lot more
Yeah.
of the area.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for fossil data in particular, you probably want more of that slop, and
Yeah.
you want it to also be predictable as opposed to more random.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's understandable why all of his data sets seem to converge at roughly about 20 or so
Yeah.
specimens. So if you had 20 or so locality data, you get a good
Good
approximation of what was
range.
going on. But then the other one never converged.
It was just
Yeah. So they stopped
at
doing
the
that
bottom
one.
of the plot.
Yeah,
It was
it
just
never
Yeah.
it never converged.
flatlined.
Yeah.
But then they were like, okay, well that's cool, but we're just assuming that you could fossilize anything anywhere.
Yes.
So let's take a look at these seven logical distributions across the Carboniferous, and then look at different data sets.
Yeah.
And-
But I didn't stay for Michelle Casey's talk, so I don't know. She
Oh,
did
what she actually did?
She did like a case study after that.
Yeah,
of
so
that.
she did. She was looking. That was kind of like the data set that built the data set.
Yeah.
But she was looking at brachipod distributions and various other taxonomic distributions across the late Paleozoic, and trying to determine whether or not there was significant shifts with range size associated with. Oh God, I can't remember off the top of my head anymore. It was earlier this morning, and I can't remember it. She was doing Mann-Whitney U distributions to see how the range size interpretations related to extinction potential,
Okay.
because she was trying to find if things have a broader distribution, is it correlated with a higher rate of extinction,
Okay.
or a lower
yeah.
rate of extinction. And so she was looking specifically at the late Paleozoic, because late Paleozoic is a sort of famously a plateau from marine diversity.
Yeah.
Like you don't really gain too much, you don't really lose too much, it's just
Yeah.
kind of a thing. So she's like, okay, well let's see what's happening. The weird pattern that she found was that I really like You just finding new and interesting ways to.
I'm gonna charge my phone.
Okay, yeah. So what she found was that if you're looking over the late Paleozoic, it seemed like range size didn't matter at all in some of her data sets, to the point where it almost seemed like maybe they were just going extinct about the same rate. And so the conclusions that she came to were either when extinction rates go so low, it's kind of like an inverse equivalent of a mass extinction event. You go so high, the rules don't matter. You go so low, the rules don't matter. Or the other option is that it's so low that it's below our ability to determine it statistically.
I have a question. When you talked about like regional extent, do you mean like actual like geographic space or like depositional environments?
Geographic space. So this is how big of an area do you occupy? The idea being that if something bad happens in Pittsburgh, but you happen to have a home in Cleveland, you can at least go live in Cleveland.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
you're still living in Cleveland.
Your population lives in Cleveland. Your population in Pittsburgh doesn't live anymore.
Yes, but this is just trying to anthropomorphize. because there's not a population of leashes.
You've invested in both.
Unfortunately.
Yes.
Your real estate stakeholders.
Species with a pathological selection against vomit or any sorts of discussion of the sort.
Vomit is dangerous. It could have diseases.
It could. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
I've missed some key.
I hate vomit.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know.
No.
If I have a phobia, it's vomit.
This is a phobia.
She once nearly
like it makes me
made
nervous
because of it.
This is completely untrue.
This is not a conversation.
Yeah, this is not a podcast conversation.
Moving on.
Yeah.
I did go to a talk where they talked about vomitites though.
Oh, okay.
Like a coprolite, but
There's a
vomit.
vomitite? Really?
Really?
yeah. It was a talk yesterday.
Like owl pellets?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so it was yesterday. I think it was
There's
something.
also interesting like sedimentology splash marks where it's like something went.
I can't. Brian.
It can come out of either end, so I don't know. Like
It could. I mean, that was Martin's joke, right? Squeeze a little bit out before it died.
Yeah, it fired off a final zeppelin.
Final Zeppelin, that was it.
Yeah, this was the ashfall fossil beds.
Oh.
So I guess the bottom. Gosh. I can never think of his name. John Smith.
Yeah, John Smith.
Yeah. So I think it was
You
his.
randomly guessed a name.
KGS.
It
I
might
was
be
like,
that.
I was like, is this like the back of a card application?
No. John
I
Smith
think-
actually works for the KGS.
I think I forget his name because it's so. Yeah. Anyways, so yeah, he was talking about the ashfall beds, and so I guess the bottom layer is where are my layers? Did I not record it? Small taxa was buried first, then it was overlain by medium ungulates, and then it was overlain by a herd of more than 200 rhinos.
What?
Is this like new information? Okay, I don't
No,
know.
I'm gonna find 200 clams in my samples, so like finding 200 individual rhinos. I would die.
Rhino Death Park. Rhino Death Park.
Yeah, so this is in Nebraska. Okay, like, so I don't know
Oh, yeah, it's
what's
where the
known in
rhino's
the
gonna
paleo
die.
world or not in the paleo world. So yeah, ashfall in Nebraska. I guess it's a Miocene conservat Lagerstadt.
It
And
sounds
this-
like it's also a concentrat log.
I mean, it's a lot of
Yeah.
rhinos.
I guess it's important because things are in their death poses and like,
Yeah.
you know, in 3 dimensions.
200 contorted, agonized rhinos.
No, they were
Greater
just
than.
traces afterwards. I don't think the rhino... Were there rhino fossils?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so there were 200 rhinos. Okay, never mind.
Yeah,
Is this what
they were
happened to
body
the dinosaurs
fossils.
in Jurassic
Okay.
World 2?
Yes.
We
Yeah.
don't speak of that.
After the volcano
I
erupted.
didn't actually go see that. Or,
Yeah.
Okay.
Which we need
Oh,
to do
this
something
is-
on.
Okay.
We-
So
I
there
didn't
was
see
the
that
skeleton
either.
zone and then the dead zone, which is
We
what
did.
John Smith actually talked about, which has trace fossils, which proves that it wasn't really a dead zone. But no, the thing that came after that was
Worms boring through the rhinos.
no, this was really weird. So I guess they found like dug in pits, like
In the rhinos?
no, like so there's the
They got
skeleton
clogged
zone,
on.
the dead zone, and then afterwards there's like some kind of fluvial,
Mm-hmm.
what is the word?
Channel deposits?
Not deformed, like altered,
Altered,
fluvially
okay,
altered
fluvial,
ash
yeah.
and sediment. Anyways, so there are canid footprints on that, and there's also these things that have been like scratched out. Like there's actually some scratch marks in some. So I
Baby
guess
dogs.
they were digging down and eating the corpses under the ash.
Oh my god.
And so there's
Good
coprolites, and then there's also these vomitites, which yeah, it's
They were
got
eating something
They're
that was
dogs.
gone rotten
If
and they
they're
went
dogs,
bleh.
like,
Yes.
they're dogs.
And then they eat
Yes.
the vomit.
Yeah. So yeah, there's like a picture and yeah, like a poop thing. No, there is a
How do we
poop
all
thing.
miss this?
I don't know. You guys are into the boring talks.
Yeah,
I
we
guess.
were apparently every talk that wasn't this was the boring talk.
Pretty much.
This is so many literal layers.
Literal,
And
literal,
also,
and figurative layers.
So many interpretations of.
Yeah. I mean, in any case, the ultimate thing was that there's evidence of a hidden biodiversity from the trace fossils
Okay.
in the dead zone. But yeah, these dogs were digging down and then eating rotten things and
They're
Vomiting it up.
literally having a
Vomiting.
chunder.
sure. I don't understand that much British.
It's Australian.
It's Australian.
Well, that's how much I don't understand.
The land of beer and chundering.
It's a derived Britain.
James.
Yes.
Okay, I've got two more. I'll break it up. I'll talk about algae.
Algae.
This is might be.
I didn't know we were all supposed to say it afterwards.
No, we weren't. It was just sort of an impromptu thing.
This was by Steve Duca, and I must admit I went to this talk because I knew some of the stuff was going to be from a Lagerstadt that I own.
Okay. Okay.
I described it. It's not really mine, but no one else has access to the material right now, so.
Okay.
But except for the algae. And so he started off.
What time period did you say?
Not yet.
Okay, sorry.
And he started off talking about a paper that he had last year where he was quantifying the morphology of algae through time, and was saying that in the Cambrian there's a very different algal morphology to what you see in the Paleozoic and later, and that there is a brief holdout in the Ordovician of this Cambrian morphology, and this Cambrian morphology is all this one algae called Buthygraptus, which based off the name you can probably tell it has a very fraught taxonomic history. And this is non-biomineralized. It's known from the Ordovician of Wisconsin. It was originally described by James Hall as a graptolite, and the material went missing, and he spent many, many years looking for it. And then 2 years ago, it was found, surprise, surprise, in the graptolite type collection of the Smithsonian. But basically, new material of this stuff was found in Wisconsin. And the first thing to do with the material is say, what is it? And it looks a bit like a hydroid. It looks like a bit like a sea pen, or it could be a graptolite. And the main thing is that Buthygraptus lacks polyps, so it's not a hydroid. And also, there's no theca, which would mean it's not a graptolite. But recently, graptolites have been described from the Cambrian that don't have a theca. They have these pinnate morphologies with an open tip, but the tips in this thing are closed, so it is not a graptolite either. It is actually an algal form. But then he was saying that the new material, as well as being new specimens of this original Buthygraptus species, that looks a lot very similar, not identical, to a modern breed alga called Caulerpa. And it's eerily similar, like morphologically it looks identical, it's just the fine details are very, very different, so it's like not the same thing. They've got two new species of Buthygraptus, each of which look almost identical to other morphotype species of modern Caulerpa. So, so this thing isn't related, but it looks so similar, and then the species in the genus each show the same different morphotypes as the different species of this modern genus.
What's a Caulerpa? Sorry.
There's this green alga,
okay.
modern green alga.
So they're interpreting this as like convergence?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I sort of wondered where he was going with this as well, because he was saying like, so this species looks like this species of Caulerpa,
Yeah.
and this species looks like this species of Caulerpa, and I'm like,
Like,
is he going to say they're the same?
yeah, like
And
this is like a coelacanth. It's
Yeah.
just never changed.
but then it's like, but the fine details are different, and so it's not. And so it was just like, it's eerily similar, and then it was just like, they're just eerily similar.
Yeah.
Were there reasons? Like,
No,
Like-
this was more like
do
there's
the
this-
morphologies correspond to anything in the environment?
Well, you see, yeah, and I must admit, this is me being dumb, but the pictures of Caulerpa are all on a table, and so I assume Caulerpa is aquatic, but I wasn't entirely sure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if you understand alga, like it must be, like it's very three-dimensional, like it must be.
Are there non-aquatic algae?
Well, so there's sort of like algae that are symbiotic within lichens, right?
Okay.
Like That's an example. But it's still like a weird situation where they're actually creating the environment that they can grow in. So.
Okay.
Yeah. And so therefore, the name of this thing, Buthygraptus, is a green alga. And then he's saying that there's also Catoclades, which is this stuff from Big Hill. And so he sort of covered this a little bit. And this is the same as things from the Silurian, and they're the same species as things from the Silurian. And so, as well as finding examples of Buthygraptus, they found examples of this thing called Catoclades that extend the range of this alga from the Silurian down into the early, late Ordovician. So the new discoveries of this stuff have basically pushed a bunch of Cambrian algal morphologies into the Ordovician and a bunch of Silurian algal morphologies into the Ordovician, and so the Ordovician again becomes this changeover point of this the changeover in the Paleozoic Cambrian to Paleozoic faunas is more Ordovician than it is actually in the Cambrian, and so that was sort of what he was doing.
I saw a fun talk on commensalism in the Kelwasser.
In the what?
Kelwasser event. It's a period during the Devonian extinction event.
Bad time for fish.
Bad time for fish. But the thing that actually, admittedly, at some points I didn't necessarily get to pay attention to as much of the talk as possible, because the thing that was most entertaining for the talk, to some extent, it was a good talk, very good presentator. But at some point, one of the students, or one person who was standing in the back, accidentally leaned up against the light switch and turned the lights bright on. And then they spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to turn the lights back off. And then they turned all the lights off, so it was all dark in there. And meanwhile, he just continued to give his talk. And then, people opened the door, closed the door, and they were leaving the door open, and just the whole thing was just like, I felt so bad for him. And then he was like, so that was basically my PhD thesis, so thank you so much for joining me. But he was looking at... he starts with the talk about ecosystem engineers. How there's certain species that are going to change the environment, and some species are so intrinsic that the environment simply doesn't exist without them. So you can't have a forest without a tree. And so he uses this as an example to say, well, if we're talking about encrusting organisms, particularly within the Devonian, we've got a lot of shells that need to be encrusted upon.
Okay.
So what if these brachiopods in particular across the Devonian might be functioning as ecosystem engineers? It might matter then which brachiopod goes extinct, and we want to see if there are interesting biases towards encrusters favoring one type of brachiopod over another. And he showed that most encrusters tended to be generalists, but there were a few that actually did have a favorite brachiopod species.
Were the encrusters, because I had to leave a talk that started with a picture of a brachiopod with microconchids on it.
Yeah.
And so this was like microconchids and like
and in some cases also like some light borers, but it was still like not necessarily kill the individual, but would just kind of bore to the surface. So and it was cool.
Was there biases? Or?
As I said, most were generalists, but there was like one or two individual encruster species that were actually specifically associated with a few taxa.
Cool.
And again, he also just went through basically.
It was solid.
It was not the worst in that same room. It was not necessarily the worst terrible technical issues. Simon and Michelle both having their slides constantly moving forward as though they had accidentally put it on a 30-second timer and did not, and it just kind of kept going, and they were constantly fighting it and pulling it back.
I saw that happen also earlier.
I've seen that happen almost every year.
I volunteered when I was at the thing and I was supposed to be advancing it, and they're like, "Stop advancing!" I was like, "It's not me. I didn't do this to your talk."
So, on Wednesday, but you're going to have the 5 people who are friends, so you're cool.
6 now.
6? Oh, good.
Up to 6.
Oh, nice.
6 people for what?
My talk is at 3 o'clock on Wednesday.
Oh.
So I've currently acquired at least 6 people who are my friends who said they'd be there. Or
I'll
previous
be
advisors.
here.
Yeah.
But you won't be there.
I don't know. It depends on
We
what
just
my
met today. I'm not going to make you come to my talk on turritelli body size. That's at 3 o'clock on Wednesday.
It's on 3.
Gastropods?
Good pull. Sadly, this doesn't go out to the public until afterwards, but it does go to the Patreon. So
Dave Batch might be there now, though.
Yes.
I want to see. I want to see something.
I did see a cool talk on feathers that my friend.
I wanted to see that, but I didn't get a chance
well,
to
it's my
do
friend Nate. I went to grad school with him. So he was looking at feathers from Cretaceous amber out of Myanmar and Burma.
Okay.
And I guess he was comparing it to modern feathers and went through a whole section of if you cross-sectioned a feather and the main tube
the
the
rake
feather, what it would look like. and it's like this kind of square, kind of invaginated as a particular tissue that runs at the center of it. So he's looking for that in this, these feathers in this amber from the Cretaceous, and the punchline is they don't find that.
Yeah.
It's not a full developed
It's a
shaft. It's like this semicircle, so it's like kind of open.
Yeah.
Which was so weird. I expected it to be like hollow, but it was like just this semicircle with the middle. I forget what the. It was like just sort of like a. I feel like I had a term for it, but I don't remember. I didn't take any notes. I just wanted to
Yeah.
be interested. Because like it had all the other structures, like all the barbules, like
Yeah.
holding together, all the individual.
But the
things that
major
go around
forms
yeah,
that we see.
everything else was there, except it just wasn't fully forming that structure. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And I guess someone in the audience who knows something about feathers, that's not me, was asking him about like flightless birds. He's like, no, even flightless birds still grow these modern feathers.
Even if you don't, yeah.
Even if you're not using them. So
Mhm.
this was sort of an interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Cretaceous age.
Cool.
So it's kind of like the keratinous sheath around the base, and then
Yeah, but so like that's like the modern one, right? But
Right.
these ancient ones, like they're not that like
they just don't.
round yet.
They
They're
just
like,
don't do it.
They're like this, and
Okay.
this is growing up, and then all the barbules are coming
Oh,
off of it.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's not an
So it's just
Yeah.
like an almost
Yeah.
arch that's
Column,
coming
yeah.
out with just things
Yeah.
radiating.
So
off
that's
the
not
edge.
even. It's not even like a pedomorphic state, because like even the earliest chicks when they're growing the
When
feathers,
they're growing
they,
the feather,
yeah,
they have that little
Yeah.
bulb that comes
Yeah.
out. Yeah.
yeah,
Huh.
interesting.
So that was kind of like it. It was like we found this thing.
Yeah.
Now we'll look for more.
Cool.
Alicia, did you find anything else?
I saw some various trace fossil things.
Okay. Anything particularly
Yesterday.
noteworthy? Anything not noteworthy?
Oh, well, this was funny. Where is it?
Ha funny or
Yes. Was it this one? No, where's the mega waves?
Mega waves?
Yeah.
Like waves but bigger?
Yeah.
like a super tsunami?
Like a super tsunami.
I went to a thing called like the Art of the Forum. That was kind of cool. I thought he had. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but he was talking about how so like people obviously drew forams initially because we didn't have photographs.
Did they show your art?
No, they didn't. I forgot about that though. I want to send this guy my art and be like, here's a modern.
Modern
Depiction.
artist showing forams.
Yeah, mine are not as good. But anyway, so he talked about how obviously people used to draw them, and then obviously with the advance or the whatever emergence of SEM, now people just photograph them. But he was saying he thinks that is not that it isn't great, but that it
It's lazy.
decreases like your understanding of it, which makes
I
sense.
tell all my students they have to draw it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to
'Cause, like,
observe it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like if you're
Yeah.
drawing it, you really have to
Yeah.
think about it, and so he
Yeah.
thought that was kind of a
Yeah.
unfortunate thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the
That guy would come and just like stand up for me in my labs.
My students used to complain. Well, I was originally having them write stuff, and then they were like, we don't know how to write stuff. We're not trained to do that. And I would watch them tell me the answer. I say, okay, write that down, and then they've just sat there. And so I started making them draw things. And they started saying, we're not good at drawing. And I'm like, guys, you've got to
Yeah.
do something.
You
And there's
get-
two options. Like, you've got to write something. You've got to draw something. I'm sorry.
I'll take it in either
Yeah.
form. Just do something.
Interpretive dance next semester.
Yeah.
I've got
Well, if you went to the teaching seminar, there's a whole talk about kinetic learning and doing all sorts of like physical things.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool.
Oh,
And one of them was about. Were you there for that part, Brendan?
I was there just for the latter half.
Okay. When he did on a basketball court, he had them
the random walk
do
distribution.
random walk distributions, and I was like,
Yes.
Yeah, I did that demonstration in class at one point,
How did
just
it go?
stumbling around to
Oh, okay.
to do a random walk distribution.
As long as you don't make the students do the drunkard's walk.
Well, yeah, I mean that's what I did. I did that.
Only the super
Did for-
Yeah,
seniors.
did it for them.
I don't know what the megawave thing, but it was funny because he talked about, I guess for some area, they had hypothesized a megawave, but if you study the sediments, there are actually, the lacinoides or the shrimp burrows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There were thenacinoides,
you got it the first time.
Yeah.
shrimp burrows
Mhm.
inside of the, this sediment that was, they thought, brought by the megawave, but if they had time to burrow, like, probably wasn't from the megawave, so he had a picture of shrimp surfing in the megawave And then he had one where it was like, things were as normal and there's like shrimp hanging out at the beach.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cute.
Yeah, it was cute.
Brendan, did you have anything?
I went to Eric Sperling's talk. And it was about the earliest history of animals and what environmental conditions were like, and looking at the record of the chemistry of shales, and especially looking at going out and seeing black shales, but from a lower oxygen world, and that the TOC in the shales is actually not that high.
Okay.
Because the modeling of how you oxygenate the world says that if you have high productivity at that point, it would oxygenate. So in order to keep it in the realm where you have oxygen indicated by oxygenation proxies, you have to have a low productivity world, and that's chemistry work done by a bunch of people now. And thinking about it from the perspective of, well, everyone talks about oxygen for what's keeping things from really, building armor or becoming large enough for us to detect differences among phyla that should be there according to molecular clockwork. That rather than oxygen, there's directly linked to oxygen also primary productivity, because you get coupled increases in oxygen as you increase productivity. And it was an interesting perspective in linking the geochemistry to the paleo implications. But also he's building this massive database with 70 authors of really carefully curating the data from these black shales through time, so that you're getting not just the TOC but some environmental data as well. But the time that you're in is still a major explanatory variable, even with their cleaned up data set as it exists thus far. So the Tawnian through Cryogenian through Ediacaran, you can see a trend in increasing organic carbon, higher productivity, and it makes sense with the oxygen data.
Oh, cool.
70 co-authors sounds like a lot of emails.
Yeah, that also sounds
It's
like...
not a 70 co-author paper, it's a project.
Yeah.
Still sounds like a lot of
It's a lot of emails.
Databasing. I'm sure that somebody doesn't get every email for the paleobio database.
Oh no, everyone. Well.
Mark Ewan can't read every one of them, right?
No, but reply all is still a thing.
Reply all is still a thing. I don't know, last thing that I looked at was I saw Seth Finnegan's talk. I mean, I saw lots of things, but I guess other thing to see.
Yeah.
Did you see that one?
I did.
Yeah. What'd you think?
I'll let you start because my notes are slim.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, that's kind of it. It was continuation of the talk that he was on last year, but that Aaron gave, which was, here's a model where you're now going to play around with the model. And when we play around with the model, unexpected things happen. But it was just it's part of this broader project to model extinction probability given different environmental constraints.
It's like my notes from the morning were like,
Slim nil.
Yeah, slim.
So I saw a few others, but I think we kind of covered most of the kind of easy to talk about ones.
Are you guys familiar with Neotomo Paleoecology app?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't know. They had a bunch of app talks, and that was kind of cool. They talked about rocked and flyover country, and then this Neotomo Paleoecology.
Is what time period? Miocene through today? I forget what time period
He talked about pollen records.
Yeah. Okay. Pollen would require flowering plants, so at least beyond the Cretaceous.
I didn't say too much else about it except for geodiver.
I've used it in class. It's
yeah, he said there was classroom info.
Cool.
There's exercises on the CERC website.
And I guess you could use it with paper writing also, he said. It made it sound like you could somehow have it like work as kind of like a citation type software or something.
Oh,
I don't know.
That I've not explored. I
Yeah.
basically had my students like plot changing vegetation patterns for like the plant lab.
Cool.
Because my plant fossils are like,
Do you have access to good plant fossils?
I've got some
It's not-
Eocene random leaves, and I've got some random Maison Creek stuff.
Do you have an old press of a Glossopteris somewhere?
I'm sure somewhere.
Yeah.
But we have Neotomo, which is, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Here you guys. Programming, it's the way of the future. Go for
Yeah.
it.
If you ever need more random carboniferous plants, we have a few spare. I could
Oh,
probably
okay.
send you away.
I saw Kathleen's talk also about spiculites in Utah. And that was interesting because it was not just about the spiculites, but also she's finding a bunch of brachiopod layers. So she was
Okay.
hypothesizing how you're switching between these sponge-dominated units and these brachiopod-dominated
How old is
units.
this?
These are Permian.
Okay.
And so, and they really are, like, she showed these brachiopods are like nodule layers, almost like a bioherb.
Yeah.
She didn't really say that they were that, but it was sort of
Yeah.
like really dense accumulation
Were they
of
articulated?
brachiopods.
Okay.
Here's the thing. Did they
don't
look
think
like
they've
did
gotten
they
that
look
far
like brachiopods that you recognize? Would you look at them and say that's a brachiopod?
Honestly, she only really showed them in the thin section, and she
Did
showed
it look
them
like a lingula?
in the outcrop. No, I don't know lingula. They weren't lingula.
That's an interarticulate.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
probably
Yeah,
articulate.
yeah, they're probably articulated.
Yeah.
But
I
like,
think I meant that in a different way.
you meant like
You
Oh, you meant
Like if it had been
if
busted
there's
to
a
pieces.
biofilm, like,
Oh,
that
okay,
they're somehow,
okay, gotcha.
like,
Sorry.
Yeah, like-
busted ass brachiopods.
yeah.
Sorry. You were
Yeah.
saying
They
articulate,
look
and I'm
like
like
little-
the inner taxonomist goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Probably.
I was like,
Um,
I interpreted it
it's
in
like
her
I think
way.
she
and I
knows
was
what
like,
a
oh,
broken
yeah.
shell looks
Yeah.
like.
No.
Moving on. The whole point
Sorry.
of her the whole point of her talk was to say like what is causing the shift between these brachiopod layers and these sponge layers. So she was expressing some sort of interest in like brachiopods need something to settle on, so there's lots of other brachiopods,
Yeah.
they settle on them, but if too many sponges grow, then like maybe they can live in harmony, but then you hit some sort of
Threshold point where the
point
sponges
where
just
there's too many
decide.
sponges, and then they wreck the like settling ground for the brachiopods, so you could have these state shifts between the two. So she's still working on it to figure out if that's the case or not, but that was sort
There
of
was a time when we were at peace with
Yeah.
our friends the
Yeah.
sponges. That time is now gone.
sound on.
Was there sediment layers between these layers, or were they like?
She
Directly
did
on top
show
of each
some
other.
models of like maybe that there's like some parasequences and things in there, but I think
Okay.
they're still working on it. It's
Okay.
like multiple students' projects.
Yeah.
Cool.
So more to come.
That's awesome.
But there was great microfaces and great illustrator work on the models.
Have they done any chem work to see if there's environmental shifts that are like, is there a geochemical trigger associated with like a shift in environment that's just causing the sponges to go crazy?
No,
'Cause
but
that'd
I'm
be-
sure she will because she's done
Yeah.
that sort of stuff before.
Well, yeah, because that'd be fascinating then. Like, is it a biological control
Yeah.
or is it just no? The environment's just
Something
changing
about
now.
the
It's
environment,
sponge.
yeah.
It's
Which
sponge
definitely
time.
she said like is it something
Yeah.
that is biologically mediated or is it some sort of like sequence stratigraphic
Yeah.
thing that I haven't picked up on yet? So
Yeah.
That's cool. TBDs. Does anyone have anything else they want to add?
The last talk I saw today was crinoids.
Crinoids.
It's by Salisbury, which is spelt as it's pronounced, unlike in England.
Okay.
And basically this was looking at some work by Tom Kamer back in the 90s, looking at pinnule size, so basically the density of the arms of crinoids and specialization, with the idea of specialization as an evolutionary trap, which is something that we have
Talked about?
yeah,
Yeah, a little bit.
the possibility thereof, or the fact that apparently if you're a bird, being a generalist is garbage.
Yeah, that was weird. That was really
Yeah,
weird.
I had my students talk about that paper, and they still bring it up.
It's still weird, right?
Yeah.
It's still weird.
But so basically, if you've got more arms as a crinoid, you have very dense filters, and so maybe you're a specialist. And in the fossil record, maybe it's showing that when you have very dense arms, you're packed close together, you need a real high energy flow, otherwise you just cannot get food into your tube feet, and so you cannot then get enough to
Okay.
eat. And if you have less dense filters arms, you've got fewer arms, you're more of a generalist, you can live in a broader range of flow regimes. And so he was interested in testing this, not using the fossil record, but using modern taxa. And so he wanted to look at ecology and extinction rate / extinction risk, and he was looking at more modern stalkless feather stars. So the modern crinoids that have the stalks, but they have and they walk around. And basically, he was looking at arm number, and so arm number became like filter density. And he was interested in calculating bathymetric and geographic range. So he was looking at, for the geographic range, looking at just latitude, longitude, number of cells occupied in a grid system, and looked at patchiness. So even within your area, how filled is it and how patchy is it? So looking at the number of boxes occupied within this grid system. And he found that many armed crinoids, and so the things that basically have dense infiltration systems, have lower range volumes in general. So there's a lower range in depth, so the maximum depth they can get is much lower, and there's a lower bathymetric range, so they can't get as deep and they don't vary as much in how deep they will be. But also they seem to show very low geographic range size. However, there are actually very few of them, so we wanted to see whether these are whether everything was just like heavily skewed by a low sample size, because there weren't many of them. And so he did recombined the data randomly 1,000 times to generate random distribution, and then plotted things on the 97.5 and the whatever percentile. And so the interesting thing was that range size is random. So if the range size of these things, even though it's very low, is not significantly different from what you might expect from random. But bathymetry was significantly more constrained than you'd expect. And so these things do not have significantly smaller ranges than you'd expect, but they do have significantly more constrained environmental conditions that they prefer. And then the other thing that was interesting is, even though overall range size is not significantly different from random, the occupation of this range was way more patchy than you'd actually expect from random. So they seem to be able to spread across the globe pretty well, and the range is pretty broad, but they're not occupying the range evenly like you'd expect, and they are limited based off water depth. And so the other thing that was interesting, so I don't know why, is that arm number definitely decreases towards the poles. And so if you've got many arms, you're probably going to be in the tropics. And so he said, that's interesting, I don't know what this means. And so the sort of take-home results was that arm number is completely unrelated to geographic range. Many armed crinoids live in shallow water and have narrow bathymetric ranges, and their occupation of these ranges is much more patchy. And arm number decreases towards poles irrespective of depth.
Okay.
But then he was like, so feeding morphology does not affect range, and so does feeding morphology really impact extinction risk? And then he said, we don't know until we consider this in a phylogenetic context. And that was sort of the like final thing of his talk. And so it was like, we need to then combine this with phylogeny to see what's actually going on.
And what's going on.
And retest this thing that we had interpreted in the 90s based purely off taxonomy.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I thought that was actually a really cool talk.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
It's a lot of data also.
It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So, yeah. Anybody have anything else they want to talk about?
That's literally, well, I saw some education talk, but that's not here.
Yeah, I mean, those are cool. I mean, there's a bunch of different education posters. There's actually, when I was sitting camped out in the poster session, I was right next to the diversity in education and geoscience outreach kind of poster sections.
Yeah.
A few on trying to expand the different types of people that come to give talks, things like that.
Yeah.
Getting expanding racial diversity in geosciences, and the whole thing on environmental justice as well, which I know was what conversation? I wasn't having a conversation with you when I was talking about environmental justice.
Yeah.
I was having that conversation probably with the students of mine that took that are now going into environmental science degrees.
That's all right.
Yeah.
We did those too.
Yeah.
Wait, as opposed to
Geoscience.
geology?
Yeah.
Takes all kinds.
It does.
Takes all kinds. Well, I guess it's gonna do it for day 2.
Mm-hmm.
Are you enjoying the chair?
It's fine. I feel very low down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's the problem with being in that position. Everybody's sitting above you, hovering,
I mean,
hoping
I
to
feel
get the crown.
vaguely leaned on as well.
Little bit, little bit.
So.
All right. Oh man, let's call it.
Good night.
Good night,
Good night.
everybody.